Rachel Dens.
Helen McConnell.
And I'm George Wright, and we're here to discuss the physiological and psychological differences between bilinguals and those who only know one language, which we will refer to as monolinguals. We chose this topic because language is one of the main ways that people communicate with each other, and it is a way for people to express themselves. Difficulties in language can create a barrier between people, such as a deaf child who is born to parents who are able to hear. They will have a problem communicating early in life, and the parents cannot teach sign language to the young child. However, language can also be a means of enhancing people's connections to others. It can be used to help people from different cultures understand one another and get a more personal, experiential account of what other culture is like. We wanted to examine whether there were physiological and psychological benefits to knowing more than one language, and how this might overall affect functioning and interconnectedness in a more globally connected world.
Okay, first we wanted to compare normal language acquisition and the developmental conditions necessary for mastering a second language. So we know that in order to learn a language and be able to use it effectively, children need to be exposed to language before a certain age, which is called a critical period or sensitive period. This period varies slightly from individual to individual, but is typically around 6 years of age. If children aren't exposed to language by this time, their ability to learn a language becomes permanently impaired, and they likely will never be fully proficient in a language if they do learn one. Now, if children are exposed to language right away and have no physical impediments to acquiring language, then they typically will develop as most of us do. Normal monolinguals who only learn one language from birth tend to show left hemispheric dominance for language, meaning that the language areas in the brain that they use to process information and speak are focused more on the left side as opposed to the right side. However, in contrast, bilinguals tend to show more greater bilateral activity in their language areas, so it means that language areas are more evenly distributed between the left and right hemisphere. This bilateral difference is specifically evident in the thicker cortex that bilinguals have in their right temporal lobe and their right frontal lobe. This is what is interesting about this bilateral difference is that it only occurs if the second language is learned before about the age of 6. Again, the typical critical period for any language development. Reflecting the importance of this critical period in terms of how language is organized structurally in the brain. Related to this importance is the onset of learning a second language is fluency and sounding like a native speaker. People who learn a second language after about the age of 12 almost never reach full proficiency and never sound like a native speaker. One study examined the differences among individuals who consider themselves to be bilingual by administering linguistics tests and then having native speakers of that language rate them as sounding native or not. Almost all of those who acquired their second language before about the age of 11 were considered to be native speakers and passed all their linguistics tests, suggesting that they had no problem learning the phonemes of the language and could speak without an accent. However, of the 88 people who learned their second language after the age of 12, only 5 were considered as native speakers. Of these 5, none of them acquired the second language after the age of 17, and none of them passed their linguistics tests. So while adults who learn a second language are better at learning things like semantics, which is memorizing the word meaning of new vocabulary, those who learn a second language as children are significantly better at mastering the syntax, the pronunciation, and grammar of the language. So these results reinforce the idea that a language is harder and harder to acquire with age, and that brain plasticity plays a large role in properly understanding the rules of language. This evidence suggests that there is not only a critical period for acquiring a second language, or for acquiring the first language, but there's also one for acquiring a second language to the degree of normal fluency. And this has implications for when children are taught a second language because whether they're taught in school or home, learning earlier on helps the child have a better chance at reaching fluency later in life. So if people think that learning a second language is valuable, it is necessary that they begin teaching the second language when children first come to school in kindergarten rather than waiting until middle school or high school.
Alright, so beyond the developmental differences between physiological and psychological people, there are many physiological differences. Bilinguals who learn second language from birth versus those enrolled in preschool programs is one study that we looked at. When English was used, the right hemisphere was more active, and when Spanish was used, the left hemisphere was more active. This is because Spanish was the first language. One difference in general was that there was more activity in the inferior frontal gyrus among bilinguals than monolinguals. There was an increased activity for the mixed condition compared to the block condition, which just means with the block condition that there was one language learned or being tested, and with the mixed condition there were two languages being used. So there's more activation in the superior parietal lobule in the left hemisphere, the precentral gyrus in the right hemisphere, the supplementary motor area, which is right here in the purple, in the right hemisphere, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in the right hemisphere. There is also more gray matter in the left inferior parietal lobe of bilinguals compared to monolinguals. In the same area, there was more gray matter in those who were more proficient in their second language as compared to those who were less proficient in that language. Bilinguals use different brain areas to process English than they did to process Spanish, but the areas they used for either language were consistent with the areas that monolinguals used for either language. This suggests that there might be two distinct language systems developing in the brain, as well as different patterns of neural activation for different languages. In this same study, researchers found that bilinguals use more of the classic language areas than the monolinguals when processing language, and they also showed more activation in unique non-language specific areas such as the left inferior frontal cortex. These differences between monolinguals and bilinguals imply that knowing more than one language actually affects brain structure and language processing activity within the brain.
Okay, we wanted to find out whether these physiological brain differences between monolinguals and bilinguals had any effects in cognitive and psychological functioning. So we found that some areas of cognitive benefit for bilinguals relates to executive functioning. And executive functioning includes tasks like planning, attention, problem solving, inhibition, verbal reasoning, etc. So several studies have found that bilinguals perform better than monolinguals on executive functioning tasks, such as exercises involving conflicting attention. These kinds of exercises occur when people need to focus on one thing while ignoring distractors to their attention from other things. So some theorize that bilinguals are better at managing their attention to multiple stimuli because they've had to learn how to keep their two languages separate, and they have a lot of practice at it. Specifically, 8-year-old bilinguals who are found to have better inhibitory control and cognitive flexibility than monolinguals of the same age. And these executive function benefits appear to last through old age. Older individuals who were bilingual were more efficient at using their working memory and responded faster and more correctly to tests of executive functioning compared to monolinguals. We also wanted to interview bilingual students from Otterbein and ask them about their experience of being bilingual and the advantages and disadvantages they think they have because of being bilingual. They offered some unique insights that we think are worth noting. First, the languages that they do know include English, French, German, Spanish, Chong, which is from an area in Cameroon, Bantu, which is from Ghana, and Twi, which is from Ghana, Benin, and the Ivory Coast. So these individuals all said that they had little trouble switching from one language to the next, and they also said that they usually think in one language, even if they are speaking in a different language, which suggests that they translate from one language to another in their head. However, if they cannot think of a word in one language, they will try to start thinking in the different language to come up with the word that they're looking for. Some advantages that they said to being bilingual include having an easier time picking up a second language or a third or fourth for some of the people that we interviewed, as well as having a larger vocabulary. Related to social situations, they also said that while they can talk about something without necessarily having other people listen in because the other people don't know their second language, they also find that others tend to assume that they're talking about them if they're using their second language and not the dominant language of the area. As a result, it may be the case that people who are bilingual can have more dynamic social relationships, but also that they can experience social criticism and stereotyping.
So in conclusion, the fact that bilinguals show brain structure and show different brain structure in regards to language, as well as the fact that they tend to be better at executive functioning, means that there could be a lot to learn about other advantages to being bilingual. Future research could focus on determining whether knowing more than one language has other effects, such as cognitive or psychosocial benefits. If it is revealed that other benefits do result from knowing two languages, this could affect teaching in the United States for when we teach young children a second language. By teaching children a second language when they first start school, they would feel encouraged to explore and understand various cultures and groups around the world. This will become increasingly important as communication around the world becomes easier and more necessary, especially with technology creating a smaller world. Furthermore, knowing more than one language can create many opportunities for an individual. This includes appealing more diverse and qualified to employers on applications, being able to adapt to a new environment, and comfortably merging one's own culture with a new culture.
Okay, that's all we have for you today in terms of human language and differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. But we wanted to alert you that we have found evidence to dispute the common belief that animals do not have language. We will leave you with the following video of the most famous bilingual fish so that you can contemplate what this might mean for the study of language.
Yes, and it's really, really important that we get there as fast as we can. So can you help us out? Come on, little fella. Come on.
Dory, I'm a little fella. I don't think that's a little fella.
Oh, big fella. Big whale. Okay. Maybe he only speaks whale.
What are you doing? Are you sure you speak whale?
Can you?
Dory, heaven knows what you're saying. Then he's going away.
Come back.
He's not coming back. You offended him.
Maybe a different dialect.
Dory, this is not whale. You're speaking like upset stomach.
Maybe I should try humpback.
No, don't try humpback. Actually sounds sick.
Maybe louder, huh?
Don't do that.
Too much orca. Didn't it sound a little orca-ish?
It doesn't sound orca. It sounds like nothing I've ever heard. Just as well, he might be hungry.
Don't worry, whales don't eat clownfish, they eat krill.
Thank you for watching.